Hello everyone! Today we're going to take a look at the sixth game of the 1974 candidates semifinal match between Boris Spassky and Anatoly Karpov. This game is remarkable because one of the players managed to go 55 moves without making a single mistake. Don't forget to subscribe, smash that like button, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So, the 10th world champion, Boris Spassky, had the white pieces and began with e4. Karpov replied with the Caro-Kann defense. In his notes to one of his games against Decisive in 1970, Anatoly Karpov wrote the following. This defense always left me with a rather depressing impression, with its, so to speak, passive hopelessness. However, I truly got to know this opening much later when I decided to use the Caro-Kann myself in the 1974 candidates semifinal against Boris Spassky. I should note, though, that my choice back then didn't really change my opinion of the opening. My choice back then was connected more with the specific match strategy I had in mind. That was Karpov's own commentary.
White takes control of the center. Black responds with d5, attacking the e4 pawn. Spassky defends it with the knight, leading to exchanges in the center of the board. After bishop f5, white plays the counter move knight g3, forcing the bishop to retreat. Instead of pushing the a-pawn to gain space on the queen side, white plays the modest knight f3. After knight d7, white continues with bishop d3. In this way, white avoids the trendy theoretical alliance, but it's unlikely they can claim an opening advantage, wrote Karpov. Then black opens the diagonal for the dark-squared bishop, and Spassky castles his king to safety. After knight f6, white strengthens his grip on the center. Black develops his bishop, preparing to castle and also preventing the enemy dark-squared bishop from landing on f4. Because of that, Spassky plans to fianchetto his bishop on the long diagonal. Black castles, and white completes the development of his minor pieces. So out of the opening, white holds a slight space advantage, but black has a solid position without weaknesses.
Karpov connects his rooks with queen c7. White exchanges on g6, damaging black's pawn structure, but it's not so easy to take advantage of that. Meanwhile, Boris Spassky also brings his rooks into play. Karpov plays rook e8, and now white has to consider not only the typical break with c5, but also the central pawn push. Spassky responds with knight e4, attacking the bishop. Black trades on e4, and bishop e7 holds the knight from jumping into g5. Rook d1 and rook d8. Both sides are fully centralized. Then comes rook e1, and Karpov answers with queen a5, preparing to swing his queen over to f5. In his notes, Karpov explained that this unusual queen maneuver to f5 completely eliminates white's chances of launching a kingside attack. But for now, white simply moves his pawn out of danger. Capturing on a3 is impossible because of a deadly pin. So Karpov continues with queen f5, offering an exchange of queens. White declines, and black pushes the g-pawn forward. Spassky defends his knight, but Karpov strikes with g4, getting rid of his doubled pawns. White pushes d5, opening up the center, but this breakthrough seems premature. The position was more comfortable for white when it remained closed, and now with the center opening, they lose their only advantage. That's Karpov's assessment. Black captures on d5, and after white recaptures, black pushes past, aiming to leave white with a weak isolated pawn. Taking on e5 doesn't work well because first black exchanges queens, then plays bishop d6, followed by rook d1. After trading knights, black captures a3 pawn, leaving white with an isolated pawn on d5, while black gets the prospect of a dangerous passed pawn. In other words, after the exchange on e5, black clearly has the better endgame. But in the game, Spassky advanced the pawn to d6, hitting the bishop and trying to prove it's not a weakness, but a strength. The bishop retreated to f6, then came knight d2, heading towards the e4 outpost and a queen trade, but this decision turned out to be a mistake. In the endgame, black's chances are clearly better. White is left with a weak pawn on d6 and a bad bishop on b2. Yes, white does have a beautiful outpost for the knight on e4, but that alone isn't enough to equalize the position.
Black places the rook on c8, seizing the open file. Spassky centralized his knight, and the black bishop retreated to d8. White then fixed the knight's position with g4, preventing it from being chased away by f5. Anatoly Karpov reinforces the central pawn with f6 and makes sure his king is safe. After king g2, Karpov brings his king to the center of the board. Spassky starts fighting for the open file, but black activates his bishop with bishop b6. After rook c2, the heavy pieces are exchanged and the kings head toward their ideal squares. White tries to gain space on the queen side, but black prevents this. With bishop a3, he follows up with rook b8, preparing to bring the rook into play and push b5. In response, the 10th world champion plays rook c4, planning to route the knight to b5 and stop this idea. Karpov makes a prophylactic move with bishop d4, preventing the knight from reaching c3. If white had tried knight c3, black would immediately trade and then break through on the queen side. After the exchanges on b5, black would have pressure against both the b3 pawn and the d6 pawn. So Spassky declines knight c3 and instead pushes f4, aiming for a kingside attack. Black calmly defends. After knight g3, white insists on the plan, and Karpov strikes back with exchanges on f4, hitting the knight. This leads to a series of trades of minor pieces, and black seizes the open file. With rook d3, white protects his pawn, but black fixes the weakness on g4. Now white is left with 3 pawn weaknesses, a major drawback. Still, limited material and white's piece activity give him enough chances to fight for equality. That's how Karpov described it in his commentary. Spassky moves his bishop to an active diagonal, aiming at the f6 pawn. Karpov strengthens his position. White plays bishop d4, but black attacks the d6 pawn. White defends it with the rook, and in this situation Karpov plays rook c5. White holds his ground, and black drops the rook to rook c8. After king g3, Karpov activates his knight. Spassky exchanges on e5. At this moment, white needed a careful move, something like king f2. For example, after rook d8, white could bring the rook to the f-file and get counterplay with decent drawing chances. But instead, in the game, Spassky made the decisive mistake with b4, apparently counting only on the capture. In that case, after white recaptures, the light-squared bishop attacks the rook. Then after rook d8, white plays rook b3, and following the capture on d7, they take the b4 pawn. Thanks to the rook's activity, white would have excellent chances to save the game. But the future 12th world champion finds a powerful intermediate move, e4, attacking the rook. After it retreats, black adds yet another threat. The rook steps back, and black breaks through with pawn b4. Spassky brings his rook to the b-file, but black checks the king. After the retreat, rook d3 follows, and sooner or later, white has to give up the pawn. After rook d7 and the capture, white takes on b4. The pawn on b6 becomes strong, and with the threat of the black king invading on f4, white is in serious trouble. King e3 doesn't help either. Black continues with checks, then rook a3 attacking the a4 pawn. With the weakness of g4 and the activity of the black king, white's position is lost. On move 55, Boris Spassky resigned.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And I'll see you next time.